Alrighty, in this video, what we're going to do is we are going to continue on with our main lobby service. So this is going to be an interesting video because we're going to take a look at how we can broadcast RPC events to multiple clients. So as you saw before in our BuzzMMO base components, systems master, main lobby system, we have this on chat message received event, and we also have things like on lobby created, updated, destroyed, as well as on player entered, updated, and left. Now, what's interesting about those events is I want to be able to broadcast all of those events to each person that's currently in the lobby, and we want to do that with as little code as possible. I don't want to loop through all of the players in the lobby and notify each individual proxy that something happened, because that's not as performant. I want to simply serialize that entire event down once and then apply that event to the rest of the proxies. So to get started, to be able to actually see some output of this whole thing, what I'm going to do here is I am going to go back into the client and I'm going to do some basic logic on the client to keep track of who's logged in, as well as sending chat messages and receiving chat messages. So we're going to get the client kind of working to the point where we'll be able to get some visual feedback, and we'll play around with the UI on this a little bit. So let's go ahead and get started. In our master server in our main lobby system, we're going to be wanting to do our on-player entered, updated, and left, as well as our on-chat message received events. So first of all, we're going to need a way to keep track of all of these players. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to create a private class all the way down here at the bottom. I'm going to say private class user row. And user row is going to, let's see here. Let's go ahead and have user row take in a game object. And we'll call this, or how about user row will take in a game object. And then what he's going to also have is a private read-only game object, as well as a private read-only text, which I'm going to pull from the UnityEngine.ui namespace. Text, and we're simply going to say game object equals game object, and text equals game object dot. What we want to do here is we want to get component in children and locate a text. So the idea here is that each user row is going to be simply a prefab that we instantiate that as a text component in it. I do want this game object to be encapsulated though, so I'm going to turn that into a field. Now, make sure that when you use ReSharper's refactorings, and in this instance we get some C#6 syntax, that you convert it into old C#4 syntax. And the reason is, or rather C#3 syntax, and the reason of course is because the Unity compiler is not going to understand anything above C#3 syntax. But as far as the user row, we also need to keep track of those user details. So I'm also going to have a public void set user details, which will take in a user details, and we'll say details equals details, and text dot text equals details dot username. And this is actually going to be a property. So we're going to create a property details, and it'll have a public getter and a private setter. So now we have this user row that can be used to set or update a user on a particular a row in our user list. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and create a data structure on the top of our file here. Let's go ahead and create a private read-only dictionary. And our dictionary is going to map a ID of user details, which I believe is a integer, to a user row. So we'll say int user details user row, and we'll just call this users. And then of course we'll also want to provide an implementation of our on connected or awake. We could just put a private void awake in here, protected void awake, and we can say users equals new dictionary int user row. I still really dislike field initializers, so of course we can't make that read-only because we can't write a constructor in here. Anyway, so on player entered, we're going to need to instantiate a prefab. So I'm going to create a public game object user row prefab, and I'm also going to create a public game object user list, which is where our user rows are going to be added to. So then for this, what we're going to do is on our onPlayer entered, we say var game object equals, or sorry, user game object equals instantiate our user row prefab. And then we're going to say var user row equals new user row for our user game object. And we'll say user row dot set user details player. And then we're going to go ahead and attach that user game object to our thing. So that's simply going to be user game object dot transform dot set parent, and set the parent to the user list with true for its second parameter. And it's not liking that because it's going to be user list dot transform. All right, then finally we have to say users dot add player ID user row to keep track of that user. So now we can reference that user by ID. Now on onPlayer updated, we simply have to do users at player ID dot set user details player as well. We could do a try catch here. We could do a try get. We could say user row if not users try get. Why am I doing user? I'm going to refactor that to player here in a second. Out row debug dot error could not find user with ID player dot ID, and then return. And we want to do an out there. I don't like the fact that I'm using users for some reason, so I'm going to refactor that into underscore players, and user row is going to turn into player row, and that's going to be user game object player row, whoops, player game object, and yeah, that should be it. And then of course we do need to change it one more time here for our player row prefab and our player list. I got kind of confused because we have this user details DTO that we're passing around a lot, but in reality I want it to, since we're referring to players specifically, because that's how it's going to be presented to us within our user interface, I think it's a little bit more appropriate to use the terms player for our classes and our objects. But fortunately I got that early enough to where it's not going to cause a big deal. And then for this we'll simply say set user details player. And then on player left, let's see what we can do here. We're basically going to do the same thing. We're going to say player row if not players try get value player ID out row, then debug log error could not find player with ID player ID, and this should be player of course. And then we can go ahead and return that. And then for this, we're simply gonna do object.destroy, or rather Unity engine.object.destroy, because there's a namespace conflict right now. Row.gameObject, and then we're gonna say players.remove player ID. So this will go ahead and make sure that the row is disappeared and it is removed from our dictionary. So that's how we're going to keep track of players. Now for chat, let's see here. We are going to have to work out something a little bit more complicated, because when we create a chat message, we want to instantiate a prefab that has a reference to multiple text items. Like for example, in our player row, we just kind of grab the text element out of the game object, assuming that there's going to be one and one only. But for our chat messages, when we receive a chat message, we need to extract out a bunch of different components of that instantiated prefab, which is going to necessitate that we go ahead and create that prefab, a prefab object. There's a couple of ways we could do that. Inevitably, it's going to come down to us having to create a mono behavior to store all those references. Now, we could open up in prefabs and we can create one here, or we can add a reference to a prefab within the main lobby system directly. I think I'm going to do that here. I'm not going to take advantage of our prefab system. Our prefab system is more about instantiating prefabs that are instantiated either dynamically or you don't have access to be able to hook up prefabs in your systems, or they're so widely used that we want them available everywhere. So I don't think I'm gonna hook it up into our prefab system. Instead, I'm just gonna do the same thing here. I'm gonna say public And then we'll call this main lobby chat message, and we'll say chat row prefab, and then we'll do a public game object chat list. So now we need a main lobby chat message. And I think I'm just going to put it right here in this namespace, this master server namespace, create a new class, main lobby chat message. We could also create a namespace under that called behaviors. Maybe we'll do that later. I don't know. For now, I think this is straightforward enough. And this is just going to be straight up mono behavior. And it's going to have a public text. It's going to have a text for the username. It's going to have a text for the message and a text for the date. Or date time. Or how about created at? There we go. All right, so that's our basic bag of properties that we're just using to be able to design this prefab in the editor and then reference these properties. Now we can go ahead and write our code for the chat. So coming down here on chat message received, the first thing we need to do is extract the user that created that chat message. So we'll go ahead and say player row player, and I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a string username equals blank. And then I'm going to say if players try get value player ID, sender player ID out player, then we'll go ahead and say username equals player dot details dot username. So with that done, we can go ahead and instantiate our chat row. I can say chat row equals instantiate our chat row prefab, and then chat row dot username dot text equals username, chat row dot message dot text equals message, and chat row dot created at dot text equals received at UTC. And then for this, I don't know. Let's think here. Let's just do to short date string. We also, since it's UTC, we'll want to convert to local time. So I'll just say to local time. So to local time, to short date string, and that should be our chat row. So now what we can do is say chat row dot transform dot set parent for chat list dot transform, and then true, so we don't get any weird scaling artifacts with the user interface. Next up, we need to be able to send chat messages, of course, and since we're in this code already, and since we're just adding some really straightforward methods here, we'll go ahead and do that. In order to send a chat message, I do want to have a reference to the input field called chatbox, and we'll use that to deal with things like focusing. And then I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here, and after all of these methods, I'll scroll slowly through this in case you guys missed something and you just want to take a look at the code real fast. I'll just scroll through what we have, so far anyway. I mean, it's all pretty simple. All the client code does is present a user interface that's just replicating what the server's telling it to show. But what I'm going to do down here, we need this method accessible from within Unity, so we can tie this up into a event on Unity. And I'm going to call this, let's see here, chatbox updated. And chatbox update is going to take in a string value. Then I'm going to say if not input from Unity Engine dot get button down submit or string is null or empty value dot trim. Then return. So if the chat box updated but we're not pressing the down button or they didn't type anything interesting, go ahead and early exit. Otherwise, proxy.sendChatMessage value, and then we want to go ahead and say chatbox.text equals blank, chatbox select, and chatbox.activate input field. Now, the reason we need that is when the submit event happens, it's going to do some weird things to our chat box in regards to focus. By doing select and activate input field together, that will force focus back into the chat box after we've updated its text to be blank. So a user can just type and hit enter, then type again, hit enter. It's just the common little paradigm for dealing with chat boxes. But anyway, so that is really all the code for players entering, leaving, getting updated, and receiving chat messages and sending chat messages. There's really not a whole lot of code here because we've really done all of the heavy lifting with the infrastructure logic. So let's jump into Unity and actually get these panels working. So I'm going to jump in my scenes over here into Lobby. And for this, let's just go ahead and get started, I guess. I'm going to right-click. Well, first for login, yeah, we just did that. Okay, right-click UI. We're going to create a canvas. So we'll all be in a canvas. I do want to delete this event system. That's unneeded. Just like our login only has the light, the canvas, the camera, and so on. Same with our lobby. And then I'm going to create a empty game object called main lobby system. And I'm going to go ahead and add that. So main lobby system. And now we just have to design the UI and create our prefab. So let's do the UI first. It's going to be pretty straightforward. In our canvas, we'll create a new panel. And we'll move the panel. I'm going to go ahead and dock this panel just on the left like that. And we'll just keep it like that for now. It's really not that interesting. Obviously, you guys can play around with the styles all you want. I'm not going to sit around on video, or at least on this video, and try to make it all look all pretty. Instead, we just need to get this working, and we'll just call this players. And then we'll create another panel within this panel, and this panel will be where our players are. And for this panel, yeah, I'll go ahead and leave the color here. And then for the top panel, I'm going to create a vertical layout group. And then for the vertical layout group, I will, for this text here, I will create a layout element, and I'll say flexible height is 0. Does that have any effect here? That should have an effect. Let's see here. I think we might also have to add a layout element here and create its flexible height to... Oh, that's taking an absolute value, isn't it? That's disappointing. Take that off. Maybe if we put in here a content size fitter and say vertical fit is preferred size. That still, unfortunately, does not get rid of that. It's also giving us this warning. Parent has type layout group. A child layout group should not have a content size fitter component since it should be driven by the layout group. Well, that's unfortunate. I guess the easiest way to do this is going to be to not worry about a vertical layout group. We'll keep this docked at the top, and we'll give it a height of 20 pixels. And then for this guy, we'll keep him... we're going to fill him, so we'll fill the entire container. But then we're going to take the top, and we're going to jump that down by 20 pixels. Now, in theory, this should have the behavior that I'm looking for. So if I come in here to this panel, and I resize it, we see that everything is resizing properly. So again, kind of what I was looking for is a header, but then I wanted the panel underneath it. Now for this panel, we do want to give it a vertical layout group. And we'll give a padding of 5, right, top, bottom, and... Oops, I meant 5, not 4. And let's go ahead and design our player prefab. So, wait a sec, is that not exactly pixel perfect there? So we have 20 pixels there, and this is 20 pixels. It should be right. Yeah, that's right. Just the rounded corners are throwing me off. All right, so we're going to call this panel player panel. And let's go ahead and start creating our rows. So our rows are going to simply be a panel with a text in it. So we'll create a panel under here, and then we'll create a UI text inside of here. And this text, this top panel is going to have a vertical or horizontal layout group, it doesn't matter, with both child force expand width and height set to false. And then on this player panel, we're going to take off child force expand height. So now each player will display like this. And it's not quite what I wanted, so let's go ahead and give some padding there. And that looks better. So we'll call this player row. And now if I duplicate this, we see that indeed our players do show up properly. So I think that's good enough to go ahead and turn into a prefab here. Now, I'm not going to put it in resources prefabs. Instead, we can put it in prefabs user interface. And then I'm going to create a folder underneath that called main lobby. And I'll go ahead and drag our player row over there. So now we have our player row. And now that's prefabified, we can go ahead and nuke that. So after that, let's go ahead and build our chat. So for our chat, we'll rename this panel players. And I guess before we do the chat, let's go ahead and jump into our main lobby system, drag our player row onto our player row prefab, and drag our player panel over into our player list. So now we have to do chat. So for chat, let's go ahead and right-click and create a new panel and move that over to, well, what's the width here? Width is 160. I don't like that. Let's make this exactly 160, and let's make that left exactly 170. And then for this panel, we'll go ahead and right-click, create a text. And how big is this one again? This text is docked at the top and is 20 high. So we'll go ahead and dock this guy to the top and set his height to 20. And then go ahead and set his like that. And we'll call this chat. And then inside of chat, I do want to go ahead and create a scroll panel. So let's think how to do this. So we need to create an area for our text box as well as an area for our chat message. So I'll right-click panel. Let's rename this to chat. Right-click chat, go here, jump down into input field. And we're going to go ahead and just dock this guy to the bottom. And you know what? I think that looks fine. And then for our chat messages, I'm going to go ahead and right-click chat, go to UI, and I'm going to create a scroll view. Now for the scroll view, I'm going to go ahead and have it fill, but I'm going to give it a top of 20. And for this input field, he has a height of 30. I think that's fine. So I'll jump to the scroll view and I'll set his bottom to 30. So now, even when we resize the canvas, which is not going to let us do. So if we resize the chat like this, we see everything is aligning perfectly, and that's exactly what we want. And so for this, let's click on our scroll view, and let's jump down here. We don't want horizontal. We just want vertical movement. Movement type elastic is fine. Everything else can really be left to default. Then inside of the viewport, we have our content. Now in our content, what we want to do is we want to add a vertical layout group. And then inside of the content, we want to go ahead and create a... we really just want to create an empty game object, and we'll call this a chat row. So this empty game object will represent a chat row. And then inside of our each chat row, we're going to make this have a horizontal layout group. And let's see. Inside of that, we'll create a new text. And this text is going to be username. And then we'll duplicate that text, and we'll rename it to username. The next text is going to be message. And we'll change the text there. Message. We'll duplicate that one more time, and we'll have date. Or how about created at to be more consistent? Created at. Okay, so now we have some problems. Our chat row is force expanding our height, so we want to get rid of that. Our content is also force expanding our height. We want to get rid of that. So now our chat row is just this one row. For our username, I'm going to go ahead and add in a layout element, and I'm going to say set its preferred width to 100. How about to 50? No, 100. And then its min width to 100, and its flexible width to 0. So for the message, let's see here. How would we go about doing this? Or maybe it would be easier to go to the created at and do the same thing. So I'll add a new layout element. I'll set its min width to 50, its preferred width to 50, and its flexible width to 0. And now, let's see what happens when we move around our scroll view. So unfortunately, our username is still having some issues here. I think I should go into the message and add a layout element here as well and set its flexible width to 1. And it's still not giving me really the behavior I'm looking for. For our child alignment, I do want middle center, but that's not going to make a big difference here. And, okay, child force expand seemed to have been the issue. So take off the child force expand, and we now have what we want. The created as a little small, so I'll jump over here and give it maybe a min width of 75 and a preferred width of 75. So this way, when we expand our chat and move it around, you see our username doesn't change the width, and but the message does. The message will get bigger, but the username the created at will not get bigger. And that's the behavior that we're looking for. Now in our chat row, let's go ahead and give it some padding. So we'll just give it a 5 pixel padding all around. And now for our chat row, just to make sure everything's working properly, I can go ahead and come in here and duplicate it and see what happens. So you'll notice as I duplicate it, it starts to get smaller as it constrains in this content area. So our content area is having a little bit of an issue. But I think we can fix that by adding a new component called content size fitter and setting its vertical fit to preferred size. And now you see that when I duplicate this chat row, our content area gets bigger as each new chat row is added, which will make it so as which will make us able to scroll down because it's bigger than the area allows it to be. So now we can just nuke all of our other chat rows, and I can come over here and I can add the chat row component, main lobby chat message, and I'll set our username and our message and our created at, and I'll go ahead and turn it into a prefab in our main lobby, and then I'll nuke it because we don't need it anymore. So now I can jump back into the main lobby system, and for the chat list, all I have to do is bring over this content from our viewport into this chat list. For a chat row prefab, I need that prefab we just created. And then for our chat box, I just need to drag over our input field. Also, I might want to reorder these elements and have the scroll view on top of the input field, not for any functional reason, but because I think it makes a little bit more sense and makes those game objects easier to find. All right, we really should be ready to go here as far as our UI. It took a little longer than expected, but that's kind of what happens. So I'm going to jump back over into our loader scene. And now that we have that all out of the way, let's go ahead and finish our implementation here of the server. So coming over here on our main lobby system, we need to deal, first of all, with notifying other players of new player. So that's going to be the first thing the first challenge that we're going to want to deal with. And that brings into the question, how do we broadcast an event to multiple people without having to re-serialize that event multiple times? I mean, yeah, I could go ahead and I can loop over every player in the lobby and send that event, but that's not what I want to do. I want to create another proxy, more or less, but have that proxy object not be connected to a single connection, but to be connected to multiple connections, so that when we invoke a method on that interface, it'll be broadcasted to everyone. So we're going to be using this thing that we're about to build quite frequently. It's really powerful. So I'm going to jump back over into the Buzz MMO server project. I'm going to create a new class, and I'm simply going to call it System Proxy, or maybe System Broadcast. How about Broadcast Proxy? Now, Broadcast Proxy is going to be a generic type, and it's going to go ahead and implement iStatic Proxy Interceptor as well as iDisposable. So we're going to implement both those methods, or both those interfaces here. And I'm also going to go ahead and, now this can be interesting. I'm going to create a we'll do our public interface first. So I'm going to do public T proxy get, and then I'll say private broadcast proxy that takes in a server context and an IEnumerable, an IEnumerable of iServer transport called transports. And what it's going to do is it's going to alias out context and transports. Bet you guys didn't see that coming. And then it's going to go ahead and say underscore component equals context dot player systems component map dot get component type of T. And we'll go ahead and generate that field as well. And the last thing that we're going to do in this is create our actual proxy. So proxy is simply going to be cast to T component proxy factory create passing in our mapped component, and passing in this as the interceptor. So this class is sort of the interceptor for this proxy object. Now, it's interesting here that we're doing a private constructor here on purpose, and the reason is that I wanted to really wrap this whole broadcast proxy in such a way that made it very easy to use, so you don't see a bunch of extraneous methods and all that stuff. Kind of wanted to hide everything so that all you get back really is that interface. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a public static t create that takes in the server context and an IEnumerable of iServer transports. And what this is going to do is it's simply going to say var proxy equals new broadcast proxy of t, passing in our server context and our transports. Then I'm going to return proxy.proxy. So now we have this really simple factory method that kind of hides everything from us as far as the implementation of this. Okay, we're only going to implement this intercept method. We're not going to be intercepting any methods that return deferreds because we currently have no way to do an asynchronous call from the server to the client, like how we do from client to the server. That'll be something that we'll be able to do in the future, but not something we can do right now. So we're going to leave the second overload blank, but for this overload, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say var event equals context.events.invoke method on system, passing in our components ID, the method, and the arguments. Then I'm going to say for each var transport in transports, transport send data event. And for our dispose, we'll leave that blank for now, but I'll go ahead and remove that throw out of there. But we're going to keep throwing not implemented on the second overload. And that's really it. That's our broadcast proxy. Now, I know there is a broadcast method built into Photon that does... I remember looking at the source code. It wasn't substantially less or more performant than alternatives. And it's something we can look into if we run into a situation where we can actually notice that using Photon's broadcast capabilities for events would be faster. But for now, in this particular instance, until we get more data, I'm perfectly content with this implementation. And if we wanted to do something in the different in the future, the good news is we just have to come in here and change this one method. So with that out of the way, we can now jump back into our main lobby system, or main lobby service rather, and we can now have a proxy interface that is going to broadcast to every single connected player. So I'm simply going to say private read-only iMain lobby system client underscore proxy, and in our constructor, I'm going to say underscore proxy equals broadcast proxy of type iMain lobby system server or iMain lobby system client dot create, passing in our context, our server context, and then for our players, I'm simply going to pass in underscore players dot select. Come on. P goes into p value dot transport or p value context. Did I need to Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and change the accessibility of something here in a moment, but we'll leave that code not compiling for now. And then, of course, we need to accept a main, our master server context server from this. So I'll say master server context. Now, the good news here is, of course, that we are using our AutoFac IOC framework. So to instantiate this and handle the lifetime of this object, so we can simply just request a new thing from our constructor. Now for this, our systems, remember, our players are, we're using the concept of an instantiated system as a indication that the player is currently in the main lobby. And that's where information about the player being in the main lobby will live, so we don't need yet another class to represent that data. However, we need to be able to reach in and grab the context from that system. And at the moment, there is a protected field called context on the base systems, but it is, well, protected. And as a result, we're not going to be able to access it. So I am going to go and I'm going to change the accessibility of client system base, jump over here, and for proxy, or for context rather, I'm going to change it to public, and then I'm going to change it to a get private set. And that's now our context. So with that out of the way, by changing that accessibility, we can come over here and see that indeed our code will now compile. So now, broadcasting an event to all of the people logged in is as simple as saying, chat message received, blah, 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 and date time dot now. And by doing that, it'll just automatically broadcast to every single player in the current lobby. So really straightforward, not a lot of code, very powerful as well, because we could use whatever filtering mechanism that we wanted here. Okay, so for this, now what we need to do is for our notify... First of all, we need to notify the system of existing players. So we'll do that first. So for this system, remember, we're in the add player now. A player just joined the main lobby. We have to loop over all of the players in the lobby right now, so in the main lobby. So for each var player in players, and then I have to simply say system, which remember, system references the system object that we have a reference to. I do need access to another thing from base system, so let's go ahead and do that real fast. In the client system base, I am going to also give the same treatment to our proxies. So our proxies are going to be public, get private set. I did this because early when I created this whole thing, I thought of the system objects as kind of being the gatekeepers for the proxies, the gatekeepers to the client communication. But then I found myself just writing methods, one-line methods in my systems that just delegated back into the proxy, and I decided to go ahead and just make that public. So by doing that, we can now jump back to the main lobby service, and I can say system.proxy.onPlayerEntered, and then I can pass in player.value.context.userdetails. And that's it. Now, notify other players of new player, and that's really easy to do. We simply do _proxy.onPlayerEntered, and then we're going to pass in the context user details. And that's it. So with this, I'll move, that's to-dos getting annoying. So for this, we just have to loop through all of our players and tell the player that just joined, who's all in the lobby. And then to tell everyone else that a new player joined, we simply have to call this one method, and that handles that all for us. I mean, it's really easy when now that we have this nice little system where we can work against strongly typed objects like this, and everything just works transparently behind the scenes. And this simple onPlayerEntered is going to go all the way through the wire and end up right here. So anyway, let's see here. So now for our remove player, we have to do the opposite. I'm simply going to say _player or _proxy dot on player left, and then pass in our context user details ID. And that's just the opposite there. Now let's go ahead and do a chat message. Chat message is really easy. I'm going to do this here at the top, and it's going to be a void method. I'm going to say public void send chat message, and this is going to do a master player. Actually, I'm going to accept a system here. I'm going to accept a main lobby system sender string message. And to send a chat message to everybody, what do we need to do? Well, first we need to go in our fiber. So we'll enqueue. We're not enqueuing deferred. We're just doing a normal enqueue. And then I'm simply going to do proxy dot on chat message received sender context user details ID for the user, and then the message is simply message, and then the received data is simply datetime.utc now. And that's it. That's sending a chat message. We could even make this a single line of code if we wanted to by doing that. So really, really straightforward. Now, however, we do need to invoke this send chat message from somewhere, and we're going to do that in our systems. So jumping over into our Buzz Server Master, Systems, and Main Lobby System, I can now scroll down to send chat message, and I can say, first we need a reference to our main lobby service. So I'm going to say main lobby service. And then for send chat message, we're simply going to do service.send chat message this message. And that's it. So now we are sending chat messages. So let's go ahead and hit F6. And I'll give it a sec to compile. I'm watching the logs here in the top of my thing. It looks like we got started. So now let's jump into Unity, and we're going to test this real fast. And we get an exception. Of course we get an exception. Why do we get an exception? The exception because, let's see here. Blah, 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 blah. Probably forgot to register our server context with IOC. So in our main lobby service, we are asking for the master server context, but I probably forgot to register that. So to do that, let's jump into the master server context, and I did indeed forget to register that. So after our, or before our main lobby service, I'm going to say builder.register. Now, I'm simply doing a register. I'm not doing a register type or anything like that. And this will take in, I'll just do underscore. It goes into this as self, and we'll do single instance. So the register method takes in a function or a delegate, and that delegate will give you access to a single parameter to do further dependency resolution. However, I don't need that single parameter. So whenever I have a lambda like this, when I don't intend to use a parameter, I name it underscore to make it clear that I have no interest in that parameter. But we have to put it there because obviously statically compiled code. And all this is registering is itself. So this own object, and I'm registering itself as itself, and I'm marking it as a singleton. So that'll go ahead and make it to any other object in our object graph that needs access to this class, can go ahead and access it like that. So now if we jump back over here and hit play, wait a sec for our database connection to initialize, log in as admin, and we do indeed, we don't see any chat yet, or we don't see any players, which is unfortunate. But our chat is also not working, and that's probably because I forgot to wire up that event. So let's open up our lobby, go into our input field, and for our on value change, I'm gonna hit plus. I'm gonna drag over main lobby system. I'm gonna select main lobby system, and then I'm gonna say chat box updated. Now jumping back over into loader, hitting play, log in as admin, type in text, and don't seem to be getting the behavior that we are wanting. So I know that I'm joining the lobby. Let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and build this real fast so that if we can see that, so that we can see if we can if the code that shows who's in the lobby appears. So we'll do that first. So all I did was hit Control B, by the way, to do that. And I'll log in as admin. And then I'll come here and I'll log in as admin as well. Oh, it's not doing that because it's not a development build, maybe? Build settings, development build, there we go, build and run. So just go ahead and give it a second. I do need another user in this case, actually. Let's go ahead and create another user real fast. So I'll just drag this over. Username, Nelson, password. Password is irrelevant since we won't be using this to log in. We'll just be using the thing. And email, nelson@3dbuzz.com. We don't need any of that stuff. So we can go ahead and save that out. Where is the commit button? I just started. I rarely use this thing. I think it's committed. Is it? I don't know. Oh, it has to be because there's an ID there. We can verify that by opening it up again, and we see that. Okay. So now let's go ahead and play in our development build. So this is development build, so it'll show us our little login prompt. And we see admin and Nelson, so let's log in as admin here. And then for this, we'll log in as Nelson. And we see each other. And if admin goes away, he goes away. So our player list is working. It just seems to not notify us of ourselves. I don't know if I want... Do I want that behavior? That's a good question. Let's just assume that I want it for now. So to do that, basically we would want to, after we add, we invoke the proxy on player entered after we add it to the players list. So that way a person will be notified of himself. So now we rebuilt. So now I should see Nelson up here. Okay, so our players are indeed working. Our chat, however, is really unfortunately not working. So let's debug this to make sure that the event is being fired in the first place. So to do that, I'm going to jump down here into my on-chat message received. I'm going to say debug log out message. Whoops, not on-chat message received, on-chat box updated. And we'll come up down here. And then we'll come over here and we'll hit play and hit admin. Okay, so that's working. Now let's see if that, for some reason, that that if statement is causing me issues. Maybe I misspelled something. But let's just rule that out real fast. Okay, so the if statement is causing issues. So let's figure this out. Input get button down. Do I want get button down or get key down? I forget. I think it's get key down. You know, that'd make a whole lot more sense. I think. Submit as unknown. This is interesting here because this code should work unless there's something funky going on with my input settings. Maybe it's an option on the text box itself. I can't believe I forgot this. Let's see here. So, navigation, automatic, interactable, transition, don't care, don't care, don't care. Really don't care. Oh, you know what? I didn't want on value changed. I wanted on end edit. I'm sorry for being stupid. Where are you? Am I blind? Main lobby system. Chat box updated. Derp. Ah. All right, let's go ahead and nuke that that debug log that I had in there. Come back here, hit play. Hopefully it'll work. Whoops. I, of course, wanted to go through our loader. Hit play, admin, and there we go. Okay, so now if I launched a second one, so for our last example, again, another 50-minute video. Been trying to keep these shorter, but I was like, oh, this won't take very long. I can do this. No. I'll have to do a better job of breaking things up later. So let's go ahead and log in here. I'll log in to admin here and to Nelson here, and then I'll say hello world, and we get it on both. So now we have chat. We have chat, and we can see who's logged in, and that's really exciting. Now, obviously, you can go ahead and do the same scroll treatment to the players list as well if you wanted to do that. Anyway, that's it for that. I know UI stuff is always going to be long and boring and annoying, but that's stuff that we have to do. Obviously, my UI isn't that pretty. You guys can spend some time and make it pretty yourselves if you want to. But with that, we'll go ahead and we will see you guys in the next video.